Hello, and welcome to the American Revolutionary War website studying the military, commerce, and Congress. As the website's creator, I would like to personally thank each and every one of you for coming onto my website and looking at the materials that I have laid out for you. However, I must also say that I don't want every single question that you may have answered, because I want you, as a proper historian would, to go out and search other areas of books or magazines or articles or websites and primary source documents to look for answers until you are fully satisfied. And just because you read one thing does not mean that you are truly satisfied. I encourage everybody to look up as much stuff and sources as they can before they feel themselves truly satisfied. This is just because every source or every author has their own uh, ideas and their own mission in mind when they're trying to uh, write a history, depending on whatever the history that you're looking at. As a result, you may find ones you agree with, you may find ones that you don't agree with. However, you don't know which one is which, and you don't know which one you'll agree with more, or how to argue and debate points made by the ones you either disagree with or the ones you agree with until you read both, or the third category, who's more in the middle of the two. That way, you get a whole wide variety, but you also get to see where your true allegiances lie. So I'll get off of that soapbox for now and just introduce myself. And I'm Kyle James Molnick. I'm a Washburn senior. I'm currently studying history, legal studies with two minors, one in military studies and homeland security, the other in uh, criminal justice. And then it is my hope, after finishing my undergraduate studies, to go on to law school and then applying with one of the military branches to be a judge advocate general in that particular branch. Then afterwards, I'm either hoping to move into the uh, private citizen uh, legal field, or going on to a university somewhere where I can hopefully get my doctorate in military histories or military science, or something to do with military history, because that is my favorite uh, area to study of history. And uh, so, in thinking about why I chose these three topics, military, commerce, and Congress, is important to me, as well as why I think we should study the American Revolutionary period. And the easiest answer that I can give is that the American Revolutionary period made us who we are today. For instance, we still use the same Constitution. Yes, it has been amended, but the founders of the Constitution meant for that to happen. Yes, we still debate over some of the language used. That was also meant to happen by the founders who wrote the document. simply because they knew society would change and they knew that legal arguments would change. Did they know that we would probably go back to readings such as the Federalist Papers and look at what they had to say? Maybe. I mean, it's highly anticipated that that would be a yes, since they wrote it down for their um, contemporary early Americans in the society to read and argue why a national government or a federal government was needed uh, to ensure the safety and well-being and overall tranquility and general welfare of the American public. Um, However, that may just simply be for their contemporary Americans and not for posterity. However, it does give us an insight to what they believe and how they argued about certain aspects of government affecting daily life. So, another way that it's important why we study it is because it allows us to see how one thing can lead to another. For instance, it leads to so many different things for women, African Americans, and uh, non elite, low socioeconomic status white males. Starting off with women, it gives them uh, an opportunity to increase their role as a wife and a mother, as the overall caregiver of the house and the family while their husband is away fighting or doing some type of work for the military on either side. Also, they are uh, used uh, as spies since they're generally trusted by both sides, and even you have the famous Molly Pitcher, who not only served refreshments uh, during battles, but there's also the um, myth or the tall tale legend that she actually helped uh, with the cannon. Another thing how it helped women was that they became more political and enacted groups such as the Daughters of Liberty, and then they acted within their own political circles in order to ensure that the Patriot movement or the Loyalist movement overall succeeded, and that way their liberty was gained or kept safe the way that they saw their liberty um, being, uh, whether they were for getting out of um, Britain's chains of slavery, or clutches, or loyalists getting away, or loyalist women getting away from the chains or clutches of the tyrannic uh, patriots. Um, and then for African Americans, it gave them a role to run away to British lines or to incite kind of revolts due to British influence. Um, it also gave them time to actually write and participate in pro-patriot expressions against British tyranny, along with them putting forth their own kind of revolutionary rhetoric about why slavery and cruelties towards them by whites should end, uh, which was most popular by by many patriots um, than before, and such as Patrick Henry, uh, Dr. Benjamin Rush, um, even uh, preachers or evangelical ministers um, saw it and saw this paradox of us claiming to be in the chains of Britain while at the same time we're putting other people in chains of our own slavery and slavery of our own making. And so their argument became these ministers' arguments became to simply not talk about our own slavery while we at the same time uh, put slavery onto others. And uh, so that happened. It turned more patriots' attention onto it. Washington even expressed in a letter his want um, for laws and states adopted by each state to abolish slavery. However, this was done in, I believe, 1775 or 1785 or 1786. Um, and then, uh, and then they were also able to kind of write about their own feelings and such as Phyllis Wheatley and become religious leaders and speaking out to white congregations about the effects of American slavery onto the slaves. And I largely, uh, and I think that throughout history you can see kind of how the effects of the American Revolution affect each kind of group. But I want to draw a special kind of consideration to this with the Clark-Doll test that was used um, for the Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court case, and that it affected so many people psychologically. Jim Crow did, to where they kind of felt that, well, they didn't kind of feel it, they felt it in a big way that white was overall better than black. So I can, if the same test was done or a similar test was done in that time period, I can only imagine what kind of results they would have got. But moving on to white men of low socioeconomic status or just property-less white men, they were able to largely get the land to the west, which would have made them be able to vote, become a territory and whatnot under the new nation, but they also faced at the same time they hated that they were dying for a quote-unquote um, rich man's war. And so they were basically being pushed into poverty, pushed into military service for the elite who just wanted to be away from the tyranny of Great Britain. for low socioeconomic males, uh, we can examine George Robert Twelves Hughes, a shoemaker in Boston, who went from showing deference to the non-aristocratic elite class, like John Hancock, um, where he was really anxiety ridden about meeting him and being invited to his house and how to act and whatnot, um, to where he was basically forced, or not really forced, but he was able to be put into more of a position where he became more militarized in his political action, along with military action as well, since he did take part in the planning and overall carrying out the dumping of the 342 chests of tea during the Boston Tea Party. And I think it's even more revealing that he thinks that he saw John Hancock right next to him during the Boston Tea Party. And the telling part of this is that he's bringing the uh, the non-aristocratic elite, whether it be Hancock, Washington, or anybody else, Jefferson, etc. He was pulling them down and pushing himself up to the same level where they were equal in standing and stature and in every single way possible. And then he even saw the courts as a way to uh, kind of act as his remedy when in the remedy of other people, rather than wanting mob justice or military justice. And that largely comes into place where he uh, went to the British court, which was a military court, saying that he made shoes for Captain Preston, famous for the Boston Massacre, and then he never got paid. Well, in return, the soldier, it wasn't Preston, the soldier actually ended up receiving lashes for not paying Hughes, but all Hughes wanted was his money, which he didn't end up getting. And so that's just the military side of it. The other thing was that the other part where he wanted regular court, a civil court, to act on his behalf was when he was struck and he was wronged by another person who then fell into the kind of mobocracy, mob rule thing, and he was chased out of town. And Hughes didn't want that either. All he wanted was to calmly address him before the court and to see his punishment be placed by law and justice, by the justice system, rather than leaving it to the common people to decide his fate without an actual ruling by a judiciary officer. And so, moving on to the three sections now, military. I chose military largely because it's my favorite study. It's my favorite kind of uh, area in history, and it's one of the aspects that I study most and that I'm interested most in. And it always often upsets me when people talk bad about it, but I know to expect it by this point, but it still upsets me because it's something to do with the definitions, it's something to do with the strategy, it's something to do with just its overall blandness and boringness. So they claim. However, I should say that the way I view military history, it opens up so much wider to a wider spectrum, because without military history, you cannot properly study how a war or post-war, or pre-war for that matter, uh, society and environment, whether it be globally or just nationally, is created without knowing what happened during the war. For instance, during this war, it was pretty much um, society kind of, it was able to work in some in several aspects, like everybody knew what was to be expected of him, the deference kind of thing that Hughes experienced early on with Hancock. And then there was also that the loyalists, or those would-be loyalists, would actually get along with would-be patriots. And they had a common enemy being the French, Spanish, and Native Americans, along with each other in terms of land speculation or anything else, when their own self-interest and regionalist interests with the other territories kind of invaded each other. So they were largely kind of able to come together under being British citizens, and then wanting to basically oust uh, the Native Americans, the French, the Spanish, and so on. During the Revolution, however, it largely became a civil war, and it was kind of based upon ebb and flow, because there weren't hardcore patriots, there weren't hardcore loyalists all the time. It would just sometimes it would be territory changing place. It would be the self-interest of whoever the person was. For instance, the one of the greatest names among American traders, Benedict Arnold. He wasn't even selected by the British to become a trader. He just felt tired getting passed over every time for promotion, and then he even had a loyalist wife that kind of was in his ear a little bit, and then uh, kind of facilitated him um, becoming um, more of an asset to the British side and more of a liability to the American side, because she was able to be in his ear, uh, along with using his kind of uh, his disdain and unhappiness at what was happening in the Continental Army to her advantage, as well as to his advantage, to get uh, a good deal on land and whatnot for helping them out. But that also happened with anybody who fought for Britain, where they would be able to get so much land and so much of a recurring payment um, due to their service for the crown. Although it should be noted that mere soldiers and infantrymen got less than their officers. So and then after the war, the kind of military aspect still remained. What do we do about standing armies? Even though that, uh, the British was still there, so do military engagements still happen? Do we use the military? And actually, the military did not disband until the very last, um, until every British citizen or military person or refugee who wanted to go with them was evacuated from New York, and then Washington rode to Philadelphia and resigned his commission upon his duty of leading the new American nation into independence was complete. And so then we look at commerce, and the hard points there, what commerce was made, what trade deals happened, how did we kind of influence uh, Denmark and France and Spain to assist us, even though that we, as a more Protestant nation and Protestant Englishman background, how did we work with Catholic monarchies, even though that we weren't wanting to become a monarchy? And so that had parts to do with commerce, and how did the states use fiscal policies during and after the war? How did we get coinage and currency to work or not work in most of the cases? And then how did we trust our state legislature? How did they trust their state legislatures to best handle the money issue? And lastly, Congress, which is most important, just because of its task to basically fund and allocate resources to be used during the war, as well as to create kind of the governmental or governmental aspects of what they can do and what they can't do, and how they rely upon the states and how they make states succumb or agree to their overall power. And from this perspective, it should be it's not an easy task to do, or to think of them having, as most only served in their either specific community or just on the state legislature, and that most did not have really a whole lot of interaction with the other. However, having such a Congress allowed them to get used to the idea of working with others, of working with each other, of knowing who each other kind of was, and how to and how what kind of inferences or descriptions from the delegate from any state, such as New York or Massachusetts or Virginia, would give about their citizenry. And that increased uh, that increased communication between the delegates, and that it gave each delegate a pretty good example or depiction of each other's colonies, as well as each other as a person and their own beliefs. So that's primarily the reasons why I chose each one, uh, military, commerce, and Congress, because they interact with so much with each other, along with many different groups, such as non-aristocratic colonial elites, um, women, African American, uh, non-aristocratic, socioeconomic, uh, middle class or lower class whites, property-less white men, and it really allows you to expand and focus on so many different aspects of the early colonial American society, with only focusing on just three main topics. Um, and that's largely due to the uh, way in that I'm using the military history at this point in the military, because without the analysis of the military, you can't see how commerce will change, or why commerce is needed, or why or how Congress kind of becomes the contemporary American Congress it does today as we know it, or back then as they knew it to be under the Articles of Confederation, along with the federal United States Constitution that replaced it. And so, in using the military once again, in using them, I'm broadening kind of their role to be central, in that they are working as the prime hope of all Americans, uh, and their focus is much more on how they are going to accomplish giving independency so that commerce may reign and that Congress may also reign. However, what Congress are you talking about? Are you talking about the state legislatures, Congresses, or are you talking about the federal Congress, either under the Articles of Confederation or the Constitution? Because there should be a difference of factors, or a difference of markings there between where each one kind of stops and each one begins, um, in the minds of Americans back in uh, the American Revolutionary War period, whether they wanted the military to succeed only in giving freedoms to states, freedoms to the limited Congress under the Articles of Confederation, or to the federal government under the US Constitution. As such, that means that most of the military is not only fighting for the independence of the United States, but for the right to find out and have the freedom and liberty and the overall idea to, or idea to experiment in the different currency, or uh, the different currency and ways to exchange and commerce, along with the different ways to govern. And this specifically in relation to commerce and currency, we needed to we were largely becoming a non-specie and non-mercantilist economy. So the military was largely going to decide whether we would have to deal in specie under the British, or if we would have to be still a mercantilist economy under British control. Or would we break away, and then what and how would we institute different ideas or different ways to effectively run our commerce, our currency, and interact with the mercantilist European empires. In regards to, once again, in regards to governing, were we going to largely be undervalued as only a colony, and in the words of Thomas Paine, an island has no right to govern a continent, and that appeared in Common Sense. And so, when is the time that we say we want a separate Congress, we want to govern ourselves, and basically state the utter ridiculousness of the situation of a continent being forced to listen to an island with a more problem of just not focused on equality and seeing each other as equals because of how much the mother country actually depended on us to give them the raw materials that they required to still produce goods and to increase their overall potential value, and being one of the largest or one of the better running European economies. In closing, I thank you for taking the time to watch this video, and I hope that it was able to give you a good introduction to some of the materials that you would find on the website, as well as searching elsewhere for other answers, information about myself, and I just really hope that you are able to learn much from everything on this website. Thank you, and have a happy searching, answering, and browsing to answer all your history questions, and you are all fantastic historians in my book. Bye-bye.